On this day in the year 2000, Clint Eastwood's Space Cowboys opens in theaters.
Rockets were born.
Stick to their protocol, will you, Hawk?
Michael!
Sock it to him.
I have never met a kid who didn't dream of being an astronaut when he grew up.
You ever meet a kid that wouldn't grow up?
Thank you, God.
Welcome to space, Frank.
You'd get a load of this.
General, just what sort of modifications have your people made here?
I'm not getting this crew killed, you included.
You miss, you're never gonna make it back to the ship.
I thought this was gonna be hard.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Monday morning here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today marks the 24th anniversary of the release of a Clint Eastwood film that was popular at the time. It was a box office hit, but with so many classic movies he has appeared in as actor, as director, as producer, sometimes as actor, director, and producer, it is easy for certain films to kind of fall below the radar, to be not as remembered by history as others. 24 years ago, today, Clint Eastwood's Space Cowboys opened in theaters. And Space Cowboys got good reviews and grossed about 2 times its production cost. It was not an inexpensive film to make. The production budget, including marketing, was somewhere around $65 million. Significant amount of money, especially 24 years ago. You start calculating inflation, time value of money. Part of the reason why the budget was so outsized, there's a lot of special effects. And it was not an easy production. There were a lot of different sets that had to be prepared. It was a very taxing production, probably the most difficult that Clint dealt with after the 70s. Because if you want to say what was the most arduous for him personally, the Eiger Sanction. Because he was doing his own mountain climbing, and there were moments where he probably could have died. He was lucky he came out of that without a scratch. There was actually a stunt guy who was a climber, he died in a rock slide. It could have been Clint. But Space Cowboys was an arduous production in some ways. And it wasn't the movie that Clint originally set out to make. So there was a lot of interest there's always been interest in the space program, but in the 90s, as the mid-90s moved to the late 90s in particular, when you had one of the original NASA astronauts, John Glenn, who would run for president. He was a United States Senator. Ed Harris plays him, of course, in the movie The Right Stuff. And Glenn Powell plays him in Hidden Figures. So John Glenn is a historical figure, but he already was a historical figure in the late 90s when they sent him back up into space. They made it seem as if, well, we're going to do research and science to try to see the effect of aging or the effect of weightlessness and being in space. They could have just said, we want to send this guy up, this legendary figure. We want to send him up once more. They could have sent Jim Lovell up too. Apollo 13 Jim Lovell. But after John Glenn went up, came back in one piece, there was a lot of talk about, well, maybe somebody could make a movie about this. And Clint Eastwood got hold of a screenplay. I don't remember who wrote it. And it took pieces of the John Glenn story, but it was not about John Glenn. But from a conceptual standpoint, they put a spin on it anyway. And the spin was, what if somebody on the order of a Chuck Yeager? Now, Chuck Yeager was like a fighter pilot kind of guy. He's the one who broke the sound barrier. He was the first person to break the sound barrier. And he is represented in the movie The Right Stuff. It's played by Sam Shepard, who, terrific actor, not surprisingly, but Sam Shepard plays Chuck Yeager. And it is a bit of true history that those flyboys, the Air Force flyers, guys who were going at speeds that had never even been approached by mortal man, they were left out in the cold. They were not involved when NASA was formulated. You would think that these guys already have the experience. Chuck Yeager did not become an astronaut. He didn't even have a choice, didn't have the option to say yes or no. So that's the true history, the background of the genesis of Space Cowboys. Now, in the world of this film and in the screenplay that Clint read and liked, he liked that they were not telling any one story in particular. The idea is that a crew of 4 called Team Daedalus, led by Frank Corbin, that's the character that Clint Eastwood plays in the film, and his second in command is Hawk, that's the character played in the film by Tommy Lee Jones. They were not just guys that were flying at high rates of speed. They were brilliant. They had very fertile scientific minds. And in the case of Frank Corbin in particular, he was an innovator, he was an inventor, and he created technology for a satellite way before most people were even conceiving that such things were possible. As the movie opens here, there's a problem because the satellite that he helped to innovate is malfunctioning. It's coming back to Earth in a way that could theoretically threaten millions of lives. And none of the current brilliant people working in circa late 1990s, this is antiquated dinosaur-level technology. Well, maybe we better go get Dr. Corbin. He's still around. And that sets the plot in motion. That is basically the setup of the movie. Now, when Clint got hold of this project, his original plan, because you have these kind of clearly delineated characters, Frank Corbin, brilliant scientist, and Balls of Steel. And then you have the character Hawk. Let me give you his last name. That's the Tommy Lee Jones character. You know, I don't like to give you bad information. Yeah, his last name is Hawkins, hence why they call him Hawk. And you also have Donald Sutherland as Jerry O'Neill and James Garner as Tank Sullivan, who is a preacher. So the idea is that these guys got screwed by NASA and crazy shit happens and NASA probably is going to need their help. Otherwise, a lot of people will die. It's not quite an Armageddon level situation, but it's in the ballpark. So Clint's original plan for Team Daedalus, he wanted to really do a Legends tour. He wanted Nicholson, Connery, and Beatty to be, including with himself, Team Daedalus. And for one reason or another, it just didn't work out. I don't know if it was a scheduling thing with Connery. He was working on, he had done Entrapment, he's working on Finding Forrester, and Beatty, forget it, notoriously very difficult to pin down. And Beatty was working on a film called Town and Country, which ended up being a disaster. And Jack was also really busy. Jack never stopped working. So Clint wasn't able to, and he didn't want to just get one of those guys. It's the sort of thing, if he wasn't going to Redford, if he wasn't going to get someone on the caliber of Redford, Beatty, Hoffman, Nicholson, he wasn't going to do it. And so the backup plan was, well, let's get different legends. Let's get people maybe not on that exalted Jack, Sean, Warren, Robert, Dustin level. We'll shoot a little bit smaller. And that's how, Donald Sutherland just passed. He's a fucking legend. But Jack Nicholson, it's different. You understand what I'm saying. The thing is, though, I don't know that the movie works as well as it does with these guys if you go that first route. Because all that charisma and the huge personalities, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Well, what the kind of ace in the hole, though, is Donald Sutherland. And I am very happy that the first thing didn't work out as much as, reboot the Matrix and let's try it the other way and see how it turns out. But what they got out of Donald Sutherland, one of the four, was always written as a ladies' man, a Lothario, and I guess it would have been Warren Beatty, but maybe that's too on the nose. I'm not sure if it would have been Beatty's character, who is this sort of consummate ladies' man, always has, a 23-year-old woman on his arm. The guy is supposed to be in his 60s. Sutherland is magnificent. He's so good in this movie, in this role. I'm sorry he didn't get a Best Supporting Actor nomination, because he's the most memorable character in the film simply because he is such a character. And the thing with Donald Sutherland is he could act with his eyes, with his mouth, very distinctive face, distinctive voice. And he has line readings in this film that are gold. And this is the other thing. Tommy Lee Jones, we know he could be the star. He could be the big personality. He can be the alpha. But he also has the ability to not fight other performers for screen time. And Tommy Lee, at a certain point when he was cast, because he was headlining films, he's the star of U.S. Marshals, a big budget, reasonably successful action movie, not long before he did this film. And Tommy Lee, to his credit, he won the Oscar 5-6 years earlier. He's okay with being in the background for parts of this movie where he lets his co-stars shine. And Clint does the same thing, because the showiest role is Jerry O'Neill, who is now an engineer. He works on roller coasters as we meet him, and his girlfriend looks like maybe she could be his granddaughter. We don't know. But everybody gets out of the way when Donald Sutherland has something to say, or when he is kind of showing off a little bit. And he has a moment, and Jay Leno, I used to love when they would have the real Jay Leno, the real David Letterman, Carson, a long time ago, when they would have them appear in movies almost as authority figures or to show a little bit of pop culture kind of shit. So in this film, after the setup that I explained to you, which is that Team Daedalus is going to have to figure something out, because this it's now a Russian satellite. That's one of the other absurdities, that Frank Corbin created this for the good old US of A. How the fuck did it end up on a Russian satellite? When did this happen? How could this have happened during the Cold War? I thought we had no diplomatic channels. All of this kind of shit. But they can't fix it from the ground. Team Daedalus is going to have to go back up. And Clint, as Frank Corbin, he's not the nicest guy. He's not above using a little blackmail to get his way. Now, he says, I'm going to have to go up in space to fix this. I can't do this from the ground. And James Cromwell, who basically plays the head of NASA, fantastic. Boy, is he good. He doesn't want to do it because he doesn't like him. These two guys have been at odds for decades. Doesn't want to do it. Frank twists his arm. Okay. But then he says, you know what? I want my entire team back. We're all going up. Otherwise, F to the U. Well, they end up going for it. They don't really have much choice. And another actor I absolutely love plays NASA's flight director, William Devane. If you don't know the name, Google William Devane. William Devane is one of those actors that could make reading the phone book interesting. He just has a sarcastic, snide, smarmy, it's almost his default look, is that he's going to say something snarky. And in this movie, he plays NASA's flight director with so much sarcasm. Almost everything he says, almost every line reading is dripping with sarcasm, and it all works. But when the four guys, they go through training, they're trying to get in shape because it's not that easy to go up into space. The A-team, in this instance, the main team, terrific supporting actors like Lauren Dean and Courtney B. Vance, but they're going up. So it's going to be a big group of people going up. And our four intrepid Team Daedalus astronauts, they end up on Jay Leno. And so Leno has a few jokes. He makes jokes how old they are. You guys are in your 70s. You know, do you still pee standing up? Whatever. It's just stupid shit. He says dumb stuff. The guys are laughing. And then Jay Leno kind of looks at them. He looks at Clint. And he says, so I understand one of you guys is a real ladies' man. Now, and all of a sudden, Clint Eastwood, Tommy Lee Jones, and James Garner, the old guy from The Notebook, if you don't know the name, the old guy from The Notebook, they all point at Donald Sutherland. And then the audience applauds, and Jay goes, oh, okay, Jerry, that would be you. Because honestly, he doesn't look like, out of those four, this would be the ladies' man. Clint at 70 was still considered extremely attractive. Tommy Lee with those rough-hewn good looks. James Garner was like a dreamboat when he was in his younger days. Man looked like an Abercrombie and Fitch model. Sutherland is the least likely to be the ladies' man, and that's what works. So when Jay Leno goes, "Oh, Jerry, that would be you." So Donald Sutherland almost smiles at the camera and he goes, "I don't know what the big deal is. They all say that. But honestly, the reason, if you want to know what the secret is, it's not about me. It's about the woman and her desire to tap into her capacity for infinite orgasms." Place goes crazy. The guys are hiding their faces, but Donald reads the line as if he is not joking. Very, very serious and sober. And it was the biggest laugh seeing it in theaters on opening day. The place was going crazy. We knew he was going to say something like that. We just didn't know exactly what. The guys go up into space. And a lot of this movie, and it is true, it's not entirely new material. The sequences of the guys training and trying to get up to speed so they can actually get into space and not pass out within 3 seconds of getting out of the Earth's atmosphere. Like, these are all real things. The movie tries to take them seriously. But we saw similar training sequences in a number of movies of that era. It's basically a rerun of what you see in Armageddon. Now, if you haven't seen the movie Armageddon, this might all be new. And to a lesser extent, Deep Impact. Those were the two big, it's the end of the world as we know it, movies that came out in the summer of 1998. This is now 2000. But the scenes of the guys in space and mission control, even though we saw that in Apollo 13 too, we saw it in The Right Stuff, they're still very well done. And Clint, his ability to understand editing and cutting, and he worked with Joel Cox, a fantastic editor, but even the way he would have directed Joel Cox to go about it is fantastic. Because you never lose sight of either what's going on up here or what's going on the ground. And I also, I won't say must point out, but it is the supporting actress, I think she might have won an Oscar for the movie Pollock with Ed Harris, Marcia Gay Harden. It was the same year. She is such an amazing talent, and she made her big break. It was 1990, or had her big break, Miller's Crossing, the Coen brothers film. Alternately known as Irish Goodfellas. It came out the same year as Goodfellas. Amazing film. It's hard to explain why she's so good and why she has been so good in so many movies, because these things, they're ephemeral. There's no real tangible way to explain it. You have to see it. But she has a certain quality that can't be taught. She is prodigiously talented, has an incredible face for the movies, very expressive, but at the same time, so grounded and real. And in this movie, there is a kind of a love story angle, a romantic subplot, not Donald Sutherland hooking up with a 22-year-old and another, maybe she's almost 30, or James Garner, the fact that his wife is gone, and I forgot what Tommy Lee's character, what his situation, and Clint's character is happily married for decades. And it must be said, in the Leonardo DiCaprio era, and as I talked about how I love that in the movie Don't Look Up, Leo's wife is played by Melanie Linsky, who is age appropriate. They didn't say, well, since he only dates 25-year-olds and really, that Jack Nicholson is in Something's Gotta Give, well, we'll set him up with Amanda Peet and go from there. But Clint's wife is age appropriate. They did the same, or he did the same in The Mule. But in this movie, Marcia Gay Harden, who plays, I think she's the communications director for NASA. It's a pretty important position. Tommy Lee Jones is supposed to be the same age within a couple of years as the other guys, and we can see that he isn't. But he's such a resourceful performer. He makes it work. And he meets her, she plays, her character is called Sarah Holland. And the two of them meet, and for a movie that's not really about romance, they have a really beautiful romance. is not what you're expecting at all. And on top of everything else, Tommy Lee Jones has not played that many conventional leads in his entire career, and certainly not romantic leads, but he sells it, and so does she. And she's so good in the scenes where she's starting to feel enough for him, where she kind of doesn't want him to go up because there are other medical situations involved that he probably shouldn't go. And if she had her way, he would stay behind. And what time he has left, maybe the two of them could see each other a lot. So it adds to the weight of the story and to Tommy Lee Jones' character Hawk, his kind of ultimate end game, how he sees this going. And Deep Impact did this as well, which is there are certain times where in order to be a hero, in order to do the right thing, you take it upon yourself to say, I'm not making it out of here alive. But if I do X, Y, Z, A, B, C, everyone else is going to be okay. And I can live with, so to speak, I can live with that. I'm going to handle it. And let's just go from there. So there is a moment in this movie where we realize what Tommy Lee Jones intends to do. Spoiler alert, it's not really much of a spoiler, but he will sacrifice himself, in all likelihood, to not only save his friends and the other astronauts on board, but to save potentially millions of lives. And he's okay with it. He very quickly makes peace with it because there are, as I briefly kind of talked about, there are extenuating circumstances. Her reaction, Marcia Gay Harden as Sarah Holland, her reaction on the ground when she realizes what's happening. Clint doesn't overdo it. He doesn't linger on it. But she is so good. Her face is so expressive without it becoming maudlin or over the top. She just fucking nails it. And she's just so good. She's so real in this movie. And this is popcorn entertainment. I don't think very much of this could really happen, at least not the way it's presented. But she's coming across as if this is all really happening. There's no actorly stuff. She just happens to be, an amazing talent. The Space Cowboys is one of those movies you wouldn't necessarily expect it, but it has a very high rewatchability factor because there are numerous really fun scenes. And the kind of rivalry between Clint's Frank Corvin and Tommy Lee's Hawk is terrific. James Garner doesn't really get to do that much. His role is the smallest of the four. And I guess that's okay. He only has a couple of moments where he gets to shine, even though when they're on the ship, each guy has an actual job to do, like they're not just filler. And that's another thing that I like. When you don't just, we'll do a little bit of fan service here. He didn't really need to be there. No, each guy, this guy's an engineer. This guy is a sound expert. This guy can fly the plane. And this is a set, whatever it is. The movie tries to give the guys as much equal time as possible. But I do wish that James Garner had a little bit more to do, because you can see how excited he was and how engaged he was with the material. And The Notebook was about 4 years later, so it's a little bit older. But that's unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, that's what people under 40 know him from the most, The Notebook. And you don't realize, because it isn't the first thing that you would think of, when this guy was in his 20s, he could have been the lady killer, because he was considered an extremely attractive guy, and he had been a movie star and a big TV star, shows like The Rockford Files. He won an Oscar for Murphy's Romance 4 decades ago, just a home run hitter. It's kind of ironic in a sense. Out of the 4 members of Team Daedalus, 2 of them, Tommy Lee Jones and James Garner, ended up winning Oscars for Best Supporting Actor. Tommy Lee for The Fugitive, 1993's The Fugitive, and James Garner for 1985's Murphy's Romance. Now, it is a travesty that Donald Sutherland, I don't think Donald Sutherland was ever even nominated for an Oscar. He certainly didn't win. That is complete absurdity. Now, Clint, it's a little bit different. Yes, he was nominated for Unforgiven, although I've argued his best performance is in The Line of Fire the next year. But, Clint was not the kind of guy that was going to get boatloads of Oscar nominations, because he wasn't that sort of actor. He was somebody who could be very effective, but didn't have the range of even a Tommy Lee Jones or a Donald Sutherland or James Garner. James Garner was just really good within a certain kind of role like he plays in this film, but Murphy's romance is a much bigger role. That's also a romance that's kind of decades apart. Sally Field is presented as at least 2 decades younger than him, maybe even closer to 3. I'm not sure about that. Right now, Space Cowboys, I don't believe is streaming free on any platforms. It's the sort of movie, and you can check if you get regular TV listings. It's always airing somewhere if you get, 400 channels. But if you want to see it kind of uninterrupted, uncut, it'll probably be $1.99 or whatever it might be on Amazon Prime or Apple Plus. But it is a really entertaining film, even if it's not up there with Apollo 13 or The Right Stuff as far as space movies, or even First Man, which was, man, what a depressing movie that was. The one with Ryan Gosling, holy crap. That focused more on the mortality rate, even for people who weren't even sure they were going to the moon or going into space. Guys were just dropping like flies. It was horrible. Which makes Apollo 13 even more amazing that actually turned out the way that it did, because it seemed like it was going the other way. In real time, people who were going through it, they're not coming back. These guys they're dead. These 3, got to add another 3 casualties to the list. But Space Cowboys may not be one of Clint Eastwood's most famous films, but it's certainly the kind of movie that I recommend for people who don't necessarily know Clint. Maybe they've only seen Gran Torino. The 3 movies that I would say first, people say, I know who he is, I've seen clips, but give me some Clint Eastwood movies for somebody who's like a starter pack, a Clint Eastwood starter pack. I would have this movie certainly in a top 5 as far as a starter pack. But I would say the easiest, this one, In a Line of Fire for sure. Absolute Power, which was made kind of in between In the Line of Fire and Space Cowboys, but those 3 for sure. You want to throw Dirty Harry in there to understand how a star becomes a superstar? Dirty Harry. You want to see him really young, tearing shit up? Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But this is a very accessible film. It is fun, and it's suitable, more or less suitable for all ages. Like, you wouldn't feel embarrassed taking a teenager to see this movie. There's just a little bit of bad language, a little bit of sex, but this is a movie that from middle teens upward, I think just about anybody would enjoy it and get a kick out of it. And, Clint almost was like he was playing older. He was 69 going on 70 when the film was shot. His performance is really good. He's having fun. And there are those moments where he seems to be winking at the audience, not literally, but that he's sort of playing to the audience. When he says lines like, the clock's ticking, I'm only getting older, I don't really think that his character would say that, but it's Clint Eastwood is saying it. He's pointing out, yeah, I'm getting up there. I'm turning 70 on my next birthday, whatever the case might be. But Space Cowboys, released on this day, 2000, directed by Clint Eastwood and starring Clint Eastwood, Tommy Lee Jones, James Garner, Donald Sutherland, James Cromwell, William Devane, and the fantastic Marcia Gay Harden. This has been episode 268 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Monday morning here with me in New York. If you caught this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or any of the other platforms we're on, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then,